NYC Workforce Drop. I'm Greg Morris, the CEO of the New York City Employment and Training Coalition. As someone who spends his time engaged, partnering, and hopefully serving the interests of the workforce development community, it becomes critically important that we talk about the intersections between workforce development and affordability, workforce development and economic development, workforce development and housing, workforce development and childcare. And you might argue we've reached a place in time when words like workforce development might mean less than how it is that we are playing a role in what all of those other pieces of that puzzle are and how they work. Is childcare working? Is housing working? Are we ensuring that folks are on great paths to careers? Workforce development is a part of that puzzle, just like supportive services are part of that puzzle. Today's conversation is with Kalani Leifer. Now, Kalani is the founder and CEO of COOP Careers. And he's going to be digging into the higher education and career advancement intersection. And he absolutely values what job training looks like. He absolutely values how it is that students are finding pathways to degrees, credits and degrees. He's also going to talk a lot about what social capital looks like and social networks look like and how it is that someone who has a degree in their back pocket might be having a hard time finding their footing in a career, finding their footing first in a job that's going to pay them a wage that allows them to live successfully and comfortably, or is on track to get to that place. And how hard it is, we've sort of created the systems and complexities in people's lives that disadvantage individuals who need those additional supports and guidance to be able to find their footing into a career space, even with that degree in their back pocket. So he's going to talk about first-generation college graduates. He's going to be talking about the first in their family, the low-income college graduates. Typically, those folks who, statistically speaking, find themselves at a disadvantage, even with a degree in their pocket, and how COOP Careers, along with a number of other organizations and institutions, have partnered together to be able to help support and find those pathways, specifically how COOP Careers is connecting with both those students and the employers and the business community to find meaningful on-ramps that lead to career advancement. Now, this is a particularly pertinent conversation at this particular moment, I would suggest, for lots of reasons. One is because we know the college and university space is thinking and rethinking what its value is, just like the public school system is doing that, because the data tells stories about how it is that folks with graduations and degrees don't always find a footing, how statistically speaking, disproportionately, there are numbers of underserved, under-resourced communities that don't have the stats and statistics to prove that their kids are becoming young adults that find careers. And we want to address that. And we actually know, to some degree, the innovations and investments that can make that possible. But it's particularly important because just last week, the Higher Education Committee of the City Council and the Workforce Development, the new Workforce Development, the Workforce Development Committee that we championed at NYC ETC met at a joint hearing to talk specifically about what higher education and workforce development, what that connection is, what it means, and where it's headed. And I want you to be aware of this. I submitted my testimony online. So that's what you missed if you were watching the hearing. What you might have missed is that the public testimony space, because the video, I think, cut off at that point. Now, why that is, I don't know. We'll debate that and figure that out with what the city council is. And I think by virtue of our communications, we put out the word about what it is that my testimony said. But I want to tell you what I said, because when we do these 2 minutes of testimony at city council hearings, oftentimes I don't read what it is that I prepared. I try to bounce off of what I heard the council members asking about, what I heard panelists at the hearing talking about, and try to weave that into something that I think has value in your assigned 2 or 3 minutes, because that's all you get. And I just want to tell you this. This is what I did. I talked about the purpose and value of ETC the New York City Employment and Training Coalition. I thank the chairs. I talked about affordability as workforce policy and how critical that is. I said the Workforce Development Committee is here. We wanted that to happen, and it's real. I gave a shout out to NYC Talent. I gave a shout out to Vice Chancellor Anderson, who did fantastic jobs on panel. Then I pivoted to what this hearing did not talk about, and it did not talk about out of school, out of work young people. It did not talk about young adults who are struggling to find a footing in the higher education space. It did not talk about those young people who are struggling in school right now. It didn't talk about reskilling and upskilling options for those who currently have career pathways that are not resulting in the types of jobs that they need or need industry transitions. It did not talk about the number of work requirements that the new SNAP from the federal level, what SNAP is doing and how that's going to address work requirement issues. It didn't talk about that. And we didn't really dig into with much, the hearing didn't dig into with much detail, stop-outs, meaning folks who started college but left before they got a degree. And I was highlighting those things because I said, if we're going to have a serious conversation about higher education and workforce development, we got to figure out how all those folks find their particular footing. And I highlighted as well the Putting Our Dollars to Work report that NYC ETC did, which told the story of how budget dollars, public funding is used in New York City to support workforce development, much of that money going to very short-term programs, not long-term retention strategies. SYEP is a tremendous investment. I don't dare even mention that we should reduce it, but what we should be doing is using it for folks to find pathways and careers forward. And I also called out the council because they haven't given additional discretionary dollars to workforce development to support the exact types of things that we were talking about at this particular hearing. All that to say, I was so grateful so many folks communicated online. I was so grateful that folks jumped on board during the public testimony, including Kalani, who spoke during that, and he referenced it during this podcast, that he did speak during that hearing. And I encourage you, because there's so many hearings coming up, especially about the budget, that the workforce development community stand up and speak out. You're going to hear a little of that in this particular podcast, and you're going to hear more about how it is that Co-op Careers is on a path to supporting the advancements of 10,000 college grads into meaningful career opportunities, not just here in New York City, but across the country. Ladies and gentlemen, I am so grateful for you joining us for this particular podcast. Kalani Leifer, founder and CEO of Co-op Careers. Kalani, it's great to see you.
Greg, thank you so much for having me.
Thanks for coming out. If I understand correctly, you live in San Francisco now. Is that right?
That's right.
And what was the story you were telling us before we started? The red eye. What's the story? We don't do the red eye anymore. Is that what it is?
There's always two options: flying in on a Sunday or taking a red eye. And I'm too old for red eyes, so I came in on Sunday. I'm lucky I get to come back to New York like once a month. Mm-hmm. Spent some of my most formative years here. I know we'll get into that in a moment, but always glad to be back.
Absolutely. The last time I saw you, it was on screen. We talked a little bit about this at the Workforce Development Committee hearing. It was the first one of its kind. It was co-hosted by the Committee on Higher Education, New York City Council, and you appeared via video. Yeah. And the huge difference was it was a flurry, cold day in New York City, and you appear on screen.
Yep.
And true story. You appear on screen, and there is just this blue sky background and like this lovely tree.
Yep.
And I was just like, oh, you ain't around here.
Yeah. I got a little slap on the wrist from my team afterwards because they said exactly that everyone would know I wasn't in New York. Yes, my husband kicked me out of our home office, so I was stuck outside.
Oh, so you were stuck out in the sun.
Could be worse. Could be worse.
Tough.
Yeah.
Boy, it's real tough when that happens.
Yeah.
That is, and by the way, I will talk about your testimony too, because your testimony was thoughtful, insightful, and as you and I talked about, there's so much more to dig into.
Yeah.
In support of those committees and in support of the City Council's interest in workforce development and higher ed. And I think you are a champion, a leader, a thought partner in all of those things.
I really appreciate that. And I love that it's a joint committee
it was a great launch.
Because those two things, higher ed and workforce development, historically have been separate conversations, and they have to be one.
It was right on that was the way to do it. One other true story before we dig in deeply. The last time I was at a co-op event
Webster Hall.
Oh, yeah.
Was that your 10-year?
That was our 10-year anniversary in fall 2024.
Fall 2020. So I got invited to that.
Yeah.
Now, I just want you to, first off, for those of you who were there, it was a fantastic evening. There could not have been more energy, vibe. It was clear that there were participants, alumni, people who connected to just a lot. Incredible energy, incredible vibe. The reason I bring it up is because it was at Webster Hall.
Yeah.
And I went to New York University. And I remember the number of times that I didn't get into Webster Hall. I was not the cool kid.
Yep.
I was not the one that got the guy at the door pointing to say, "Come on into Webster." So just me getting into Webster Hall I was like, wow, I'm here finally.
I love that. And Greg, not everyone got in.
I know who didn't get in because that was my people that didn't get in.
There was a long line, which was wild. And one of my dear friends and mentors, Scott Evanbeck, who's a longtime president of Gutman Community College, he sent me a message. He's like, "I'm here. The line is too long. I love you. Yes. Congratulations. I'm not coming."
It was packed. First of all, the energy, the music, the vibe was incredible, and it was so celebratory. Yeah. And also, it was packed.
Yeah. Thank you. That was a real highlight of our journey, and there was a lot of power in that room. I think that's ultimately what we do at Co-op is we build and share power among first-gen and low-income college grads, and then every once in a while we celebrate. That was a really special evening.
And where are you at in terms of numbers now? In terms of, let's dig into Co-op and how it works and where you're at. Yeah. I know that I was watching a video of you from some time ago, and you're like, the trajectory is 10,000. Yeah. Is that right? That was the magic number.
Yeah. We're going to hit that this year. And actually, so we've served more than 10,000 fellows, and then this fall we'll hit 10,000 alumni. And as you'll hear today, alumni are really at the core of what we do. And so that was a big, hairy, audacious goal that I set way back in 2016. And it seemed absurd then, but I said, we're going to get here in a decade, and that's exactly what we did. And so, 10,000 alumni, about half of them here in New York. And then, as you shared, I'm out in San Francisco. We've got folks down in Los Angeles and in Chicago. It's been a real journey and just inspiring to see what started with 12 fellows is now something that's this snowball going down the mountain, and picking up energy and momentum and growing. I'm really proud of it.
I'm excited for you, and we need to deep dive into the challenges college graduates face. We need to talk about the challenges that we have in relation to how it is that we fund higher education opportunity, how that actually connects to secure employment, and we'll dig into all that. But let's start with your journey. You were a high school history teacher in the Bronx.
Yeah.
Where were you in the Bronx? What neighborhood were you in the Bronx?
I taught up on Fordham Road at a small school called Kappa International High School. Shout out to Kappa.
Shout out to Kappa.
Part of the Theodore Roosevelt campus across the street from Fordham University. I still talk about that experience, and it still guides me more than anything else. Like that was my formative professional, even personal experience.
What do you feel like looking back you learned from that experience? What is that you wish you could have changed from that experience?
So I was part of Teach for America, and I only taught.
Yep.
Shout out TFA. Brought me into the classroom, and then like some Teach for America teachers, I only stayed in the classroom for 2 years, and so if I could change something, that would be it.
Yeah.
And I think honestly, I've lived with some regret and even shame about that. I got to teach the pioneer cohort at my school. So I joined the school as it entered its second year, and I got to teach that pioneer cohort. It was the class of 2011, moved up from sophomore year to junior year with them, I could have gone on to senior year with them. But in part because I left after a couple of years, I never became an expert in how to teach 16-year-olds. But I, in a sense, became an expert in those 16-year-olds. And I kept in touch with them as they became 18, 20, 22, 24-year-olds. And so it was that kind of attention on a single cohort of students over time that really shaped my worldview and shaped the work we do at Co-op. I got to see them navigating challenges, sometimes thriving, sometimes struggling, and then really paid attention to that transition from college to career. I promised my kids if they worked hard and played by the rules and went to college and earned a bachelor's degree, that would be enough to get a foothold in the middle class. And I believed that deep in my bones then. And I still believe it's the best path. But it's by no means a safe bet, a sure bet. And I've come to understand just how many first-generation, low-income college graduates with the bachelor's degree struggle to secure their first good job after graduation. That's right. And so to me, that feels not just like a big national challenge worth solving. It feels like a personal betrayal that I made a promise to a group of students who trusted me. And I don't mean to put myself too much at the center of that story, but I believed that college was the answer. And I think if there was one sort of thesis I had as a history teacher, it was that history didn't have to unfold the way it did. It was individuals making decisions, and those decisions matter, and they have consequences that reverberate through time. And your decisions matter too.
That's right.
And I wanted my kids so badly to make the decision to go to college, to persist, to get that bachelor's degree. And it kills me to know that that decision might not matter, that it might not be enough. Yeah. And I just so desperately want to live in a country where young people's decisions matter, right? I think we live in a country where if you make bad decisions, there are consequences, but there have to be positive consequences for positive decisions.
Tell me a little bit about, first of all, history. Why history?
Well, shout out Maureen McCory, my high school history teacher.
Love it.
Like a lot of teachers, I had that one teacher,
Yeah.
and really made me fall in love with history. My mom's a big history buff as well. I could geek out on that all day.
Is there a particular type of history that you're? I mean, I remember I went to NYU. I feel like we're talking about college in lots of different ways here. Went to NYU. I got a degree in history. And why? Because they told me that would be good for reading and writing purposes.
Yeah.
Because the intent was to go to law school. My mother is still waiting for me to go to law school.
Yep.
I don't think it's going to happen anytime soon. But I remember getting immersed in history, and then it was like, oh, you can take a class in all of history. So what do you want to take on?
Yeah.
Is there a part of history that moves you the most?
Yeah, I love this question. Well, I studied international relations in college. My mother-in-law says that I majored in advanced newspaper reading. She's not wrong. But a lot of that major was history. And then as a teacher, I taught global, both 9th and 10th.
Global studies.
Global studies. So only in the U.S., I think, can you take a single course on all of world history.
Yes.
And then I also got to teach U.S. history to 11th graders, and that was a dream. And this was 2008, 9, 10. As Obama got elected, as we were going through the financial crisis and the Great Recession. Yeah. I remember getting to teach. The stimulus package alongside the alphabet soup of of New Deal policies and comparing and contrasting those. So, I have a soft spot for American history, and the more recently I've gotten really into Weimar Germany.
Let's tell us more.
I don't know. There's something about what's going on right now.
Yeah, is there some familiarity?
Yeah,
there?
there's a little familiarity. I will say they had it worse than we did. That democracy didn't have a chance, but ours still does. I hope.
We're finding our way into multiple podcasts here after this one. Just one other thing I want to back up on to say. You talked about feeling some amount of shame for having been part of something. And I don't mean to tie this to the TFA experience directly, because I am aware, though, of a lot of the tremendous history that Teach for America has. I'm also aware that, there are teachers that begin that process and then leave to go on to other things.
Yeah.
There's been tremendous wins in that regard. There's been tremendous insight and possibility, and also the story being told sometimes of how folks start on a path, engage in that, and then find another pathway after that.
Yeah.
presumably success, impact. But to your point about the idea of engaging with students who may or may not have some stability in their lives,
Yeah.
seeing a teacher grow with them,
Yeah.
or they're growing as a teacher is learning,
Yeah.
and then that teacher's not there,
Yeah.
that does have an impact.
Yeah. Yeah. No question. The first year you're barely staying afloat. The second year you kind of know just enough to know just how little you know and all the ways you could be more effective. There's no question that I left with a real sense of unfinished business. And so in a sense, maybe if I had taught 3, 4, 5 years, maybe I would have left and really left. But I think the manner in which I left and the deep relationships that I built and the connection I felt, not to all my students, some of them couldn't stand me for sure.
Well, that's true of students in general. I mean, that's what happens. They're their own people.
Yeah. And it's been cool to get to know them as adults too, and some of the ones where we really drove each other crazy. We've had lunch, breakfast, things like that, and they're grown now, and I am too.
It's an odd thing when you're someone in this working with young people, young adults, and then time goes by and they grow up too.
Yeah.
I know in my career, there are young people that I worked with at 16, 17
Yeah.
who are now in their late 30s, early 40s. I mean, these are just older folks now from
Yeah.
the perspective of life.
Yeah.
With their master's degrees and their kids. And
their kids, exactly.
And you're like,
I'm still working on that
"What's
kid piece, and
happened?"
they've got 10-year-olds in some
Right?
cases.
It's a remarkable thing. It's joyful. It's also
Yeah.
complicated. Not every story is a good one.
Yeah.
As well. But I guess
If I could share just one
please,
really good
please,
story.
please.
Just last night I had a drink with a young man, not so young as you point out. His name's Chai Key, who was one of my students, went on to become a Posse scholar.
Shout out to Posse.
And you'll see Posse's fingerprints are all over Co-op's model. But Chai later was part of Co-op's third cohort, and now he's our director of program design.
Look at that.
And we had a drink last night, and he was just dropping so much wisdom on me. And yeah, I mean, I've known him now for so long, but every once in a while I get pulled out of the moment, and I remember this is the same. This is that kid.
Yeah, exactly.
And it's one of the absolute joys and privileges of my life to get to have Chai and some of my other kids in my life still.
That's amazing. It's amazing to have been on that journey, to share journeys. I wonder how those folks see you, by the way. What would they have said about you?
That I felt things deeply, that I had big feelings. I think I burned out, God, because I'm like to this day in awe of that young man that I was, and I just poured everything into that. And so I think they would say that I cared deeply and maybe sometimes too much.
I think that idea of being wrung out of emotion, I understand it well, and I understand how I empathize in some ways with I think what you're sharing and how you're sharing it without having undergone the TFA experience or having not served as a teacher, but I'm familiar by virtue of some past as a practitioner, and I know folks who are listening are too. Let's talk about what it takes to be a co-op fellow. What is a typical fellow like? Where do they come from? Who are they? What is it that you're committing to do with and for them?
Yeah.
And please weave into this what your coaching piece is.
Yeah. All right. So a typical fellow graduated from CUNY a year or 2 years ago. So from one of the senior colleges with a bachelor's degree. That's here in New York, of course. In California, we work with the Cal State universities, University of Illinois Chicago, for instance. So these are big public regional universities that are, CUNY is the greatest urban university in the world, and I'm a proud Lehman College grad. It's where I got my master's in education. But these are commuter schools, right, where folks are not living in dorms. They're not. They don't get the luxury of extracurricular activities often. Late night dorm room conversations, frat parties, like all these things that we associate with the traditional college experience. That's not what we've democratized. We've democratized access to rigorous courses, to skills, to credentials. But I don't think we've democratized access to the social capital component of college. So a lot of our fellows, right, they went, maybe started at a community college, they transferred to a senior college, and they earned a degree, a bachelor's degree, typically, like I said, about a year to 2 years ago. And they've spent the last 12, 18 months submitting hundreds and hundreds of applications online and never hearing back. And at some point internalizing that there's something wrong with them as candidates, which to me is a tragedy because they're internalizing a structural failure as a personal failure. And I think one of the most insidious parts of underemployment, right? So that's working in a job that doesn't require a degree, often doesn't pay a living wage, is just how many folks are going through that alone, isolated from each other. And that isolation, that causes loneliness. I think it contributes to that sense of shame because you're not aware of just how many other people are in the same position. But it's also determinative. If you're isolated, you're not getting job referrals from friends and cousins and fraternity brothers, right? So isolation to me is not just a lousy experience to be in. It is the reason you're not getting your first good job. That's right. And so I'm emphasizing that because I think a lot of our young folks, when they come to co-op, and one of my favorite things happens in the first week or two when they're looking around the room and they think to themselves, wow, he is so smart and she is so creative and they're such a hustler. Oh, and they're also underemployed or also unemployed. Maybe I'm not broken after all. Maybe there's something bigger going on here. And so the typical fellow, just to get really concrete, nationwide, more than half of college grads are underemployed a year after graduation. So this is not a New York problem. And this is not even just specific to first-gen and low-income grads. But we do know that Pell Grant recipients are 31% more likely to be underemployed. And so to me, that is, that I think is a personal tragedy for each person going through that. But it's also thwarting national policy and the investment we make as a society in Pell and in TAP and in all the K-12 education that got someone to college in the first place. I feel like we bring the ball to the 1 yard line and then put our hands up and say we're done. It's like no, we're not quite where we're trying to go. The typical fellow is earning $15,000 on average with a bachelor's degree.
Which implies part-time work, temporary, seasonal type of work.
Exactly. So I will say before the pandemic, 90% of folks coming to us were underemployed. So they were working, but in a job that didn't require a degree. And only about 10% were unemployed. Now that's really shifted. It's about 50-50. So we're getting a lot of folks who are actually earning $0. If you exclude them, a typical underemployed person is earning about $20,000 to $25,000. So yes, that's it's very hard to get 40 hours of hourly work.
Yep.
And these are typically jobs that folks had during college, right? So it's the barista job or driving for Lyft or Uber that they never expected to still be in a year, 2 years, 3 years after college. But they are, and they're making do, and there's no shame in any of those roles, but it's not why they worked so hard and overcame long odds and made immense sacrifices. And it's also not why society invests in public financial aid.
It's not what the dream is. It's not what it is that we've talked about in terms of finding your pathway up a ladder over time.
Exactly. So that is the core challenge that we're trying to solve, underemployment after graduation. And I think often when people look at underemployment among college grads, if they look at it at all, I think it's a deeply misunderstood and minimized problem. But we'll get to that. I think when they look at an underemployed grad, they see him as water under the bridge. Like, oof, we got it wrong with that one. Let's get it right with the next one. But if you're 24, you still have, 30, 40 years of work ahead of you.
That's right.
And pivoting someone from underemployment to full employment has tremendous implications. We were really fortunate at Co-op to have a pro bono project from McKinsey this last summer. And they helped us do an analysis that showed if you manage to move from initial underemployment to a good first job that requires a degree, that contributes $300,000 to increased wealth over the course of your 30-year career. And that it actually also, over the course of just 5 years, can drive $60,000 in savings for the government. So that's in terms of increased tax revenue, decreased spending on unemployment benefits and Medicaid. Those are the three main drivers. So the cost of not helping someone overcome underemployment are actually massive. And we've really come to believe that when we do our intervention is a critical part of its success, right? If you're working pre-graduation, there's so much important work that can happen there. We stand on the shoulders of those efforts. But ultimately, that's about preparation.
Yeah.
And we want to be with you in the wilderness, right? So, yes, it's great if you have someone helping you pack your bags and pick out your hiking boots. But then it's sort of like, all right, good luck. Yeah. And we actually want to be with you on the job market because, frankly, there's no one else. But also because you're not actually eligible for a full-time job if you have class 4 days a week from 11 to 3 p.m. So you're actually not even in the same arena as employers. And because we work with fellows who have a bachelor's degree and are available to take a full-time job when it comes across their path, they're in it. They're ready to go. And they understand deep in their bones that the bachelor's degree was not enough. Right? We're not giving our intervention to anyone who doesn't need it. And that's another thing about pre-graduation interventions is you actually don't know who needs it, right? If half of college grads are underemployed, the other half are fully employed in appropriate college-level roles, and they don't actually need an additional intervention. And so I think from a systems perspective, there's a lot of value in investing after graduation because it's more efficient. You're only investing in the people who need it, and you can actually achieve the core outcome you're seeking. And so I love the movement towards getting everyone an internship while they're students, 2, 3 internships.
Yeah.
Great.
Yeah.
But none of those is actually the core outcome we're seeking.
That's right.
We want people in full-time salaried work. And I think as a system, we sort of run away from that. And I think we've got to run towards that fire because that's where you have the highest leverage.
Well, it's interesting that, I am at the age I'm at now, and it certainly is the case. 2 things. One, I was always told, my parents raised me to go to college. That was the expectation. They raised me I grew up in Schenectady, New York. They raised me to get out of Schenectady, New York, and find my way in other places. And I think the thinking was with that degree in your pocket, the opportunities would fall upon you. Mm. And what's interesting is that we've entered into a time period when decision makers, policymakers, the folks with the fingers on the button of where resources go, may understand the same thing, the sense that if you've got a degree, you've got your footing, you don't need to get you don't need anything else because you've got what you need in your back pocket. Yeah. And that's a misunderstanding of what opportunity looks like now and social capital and social networks, which are absolutely substantial and critical. I guess the other thing to say about this is that when you ask any of those folks, and again, this is just something related to my engagement, my relationship with elected officials, maybe you've seen this the same way, or even business folks, when you ask them, how did you find your first job? Odds are it wasn't LinkedIn. It wasn't Indeed, which may or may not have existed when they were searching for their first meaningful job opportunities. It may have been associated with someone in college meaning some sort of network within college where I went to an office where they had job postings.
Yep.
But more often than not, the answer is I knew somebody who, or someone suggested that or I was in a role, and those people said to me, why don't you stick around?
Yeah.
And I think what we've lost sight of, and I think it's got a lot to do with this notion of the assumption always was, if I get you to college and you get your degree, you can make your way.
Yeah.
And this sort of investment that we need to make in the sort of what happens next and how do we find that particular pathway is something that some folks have no idea about.
Yeah.
And then they forget that, how did you find your job?
Yeah.
You know, like, how did you get your footing?
Yeah.
Because it tends to be a common thread. And by the way, it may be fair to say, I think, too, the idea of building social capital, social networks is complicated now in a way that may or may not have existed before the pandemic.
Yeah.
Because the pandemic changed the way we interact with each other.
Yeah.
Or the different social media tools and resources I've access to, which can make my world feel very small.
Yeah.
And can be extraordinarily isolating, even if I could have a sense of what's going on everywhere in the world.
Yeah.
And I'm assuming your fellows are trying to figure that stuff out in real time with, as you noted, but I got my degree. Why isn't it becoming the next thing?
Yeah. And how do their parents understand it and their families,
what are the parents and caregivers reacting to about, you have your degree now, what are you doing?
Yeah. I mean, the vast majority of our fellows still live at home. They lived at home during college. That's how you can manage to survive on $15K. It's because you're still living at home. And, you know, we do a lot of touchy-feely things at Co-op, exactly to your point, to build social capital, to build community. One workshop we do, we call it the fear workshop, where sort of everyone anonymously writes down their biggest fear, and then someone else reads it out and reflects on it. And I've gotten to be a part of a few of these, and I'm not kidding, 80% of folks will say letting down my parents as the single biggest fear, because they see how much sacrifice their parents made to get them to and through college. And so I use this term personal tragedy around underemployment, which maybe feels a little heavy-handed, but to me is actually like it's what's happening. It's a tragedy, and the implications of it compound year over year over year. And underemployment's like quicksand. The longer you're in it, the harder it is to get out. If you are underemployed a year after graduation, so that's about 50% of Americans who graduate, only 1 in 4 of those will escape underemployment in the next decade. And conversely, if you are in a college-level job a year after graduation, 79% of those folks will still be in college-level roles. So early employment is sticky. Design our interventions, ignoring the fact that social capital is what leads to opportunity, right? I think we desperately want to believe that it's about skills.
Yeah.
And I remember when I started Co-op in 2014, again, McKinsey had just put out this big study about the skills gap, and that was really kind of the lens through which we understood underemployment back then. I think that kind of tries to project a meritocratic worldview onto something much messier and much more human. And if it is about skills, then we can blame the young person for not having the right skills, and we can blame their undergrad college for not teaching the right skills. But then the converse has to be true as well, that a school that has strong job outcomes must be teaching all the right skills, and that's not true. I got my master's in education at Lehman. I got my undergrad degree at Stanford. I know how smart my peers were in both settings. I know what they were teaching. And it's just simply not true that Stanford was teaching all the right skills. Actually, I spent 4 years marinating in other people's social capital. And so when I graduated, I had dozens and dozens of people I could ask for a favor. And that's simply not going to happen if you transfer, if you are commuting, if you're working part-time or full-time, if you're helping out with family responsibilities. All of these elements.
And by the way, historically, systemically, no shortage of students and individuals are at a disadvantage to start with by virtue of how it is that the education system and the employment system has seen them, viewed them, or perceived of them.
Yeah. And look, I actually think it's kind of beautiful that we live in a society and an economy where trust and relationships still matter for hiring. Like that in itself seems to me very human. It's like gravity. I don't want to fight against it. The problem is when you combine nepotism with profound segregation in neighborhoods and in schools and in families. That means the people we do favors for, the people we make referrals for, often look just like ourselves.
Exactly.
And that, I think, is what you multiply 100 million times, and then you got the American job market. And to me, the fact that we have a relationship and referral-driven job market is actually the mechanism by which we import residential and school segregation into the professional sphere.
Tell me how it is that you find employers, how it is that the business space sees co-op as an answer to a talent question that they need to solve. And before I say that, I would be remiss if I didn't give a shout out to CUNY. I have my master's degree from Baruch, a master's in public administration, and shout out to the chancellor and the vice chancellor, Lauren Anderson, who we were talking about earlier, is a phenomenon. We're a huge fan.
Yeah. I remember when I first saw CUNY's new branding, greatest urban university in the world, and I'm not ashamed to admit that I did a little fist pump,
we did, and you know what? We made it happen.
Yeah,
I think that's the way to look at it.
Huge admiration to CUNY, and I think at its core, what we do is we're unlocking the economic value in a CUNY bachelor's degree. There's immense value there. I mean, CUNY is one of the most compelling engines of economic mobility that there is. And our assertion is that in the 12 months after graduation is when that economic value will be either unlocked or locked away forever.
That's right.
And so we need to be looking at those 12, 24 months after college as part of the scope of higher ed. And I think if we decide that college success ends with graduation, I think we've cut ourselves off from the most important time to assure that there's value in that. But you asked about employers, and so all of this only works.
Here's the connection of the dots here.
Yeah.
Here it is.
And this only works with employers. It only works with good jobs, and I will say we're in a really hard moment for that. Underemployment is structural. It's endemic. I actually recently looked. New York Fed has a great sort of dashboard where you can see this. Underemployment among college graduates is virtually identical today to what it was in 1990 when they first started measuring this. And it's fluctuated over time. You can see the effect of recessions. But I do think it's going to get worse. But what I want to emphasize is it's been a structural, persistent challenge for a long time. So on some level, and this is kind of a bleak view, but on some level you could say that there are simply more college grads than there are quality entry-level college jobs. If you have 2 million grads and 1 million of them are underemployed, another way to look at that is there's only 1 million good jobs. And again, I think that we're in a moment of real change there and not in the right direction. And so I do think it's important to note that on some level, employers don't struggle to find entry-level talent. It's actually not a constraint for them. Yeah. And in fact, when they put out a job, they might get 5,000-10,000 applications. Yeah. Yeah. And then they need a heuristic. They need a way to cut through that. And so they'll actually become more – I actually think in this era now where with AI helping people apply to a bunch of jobs, it counterintuitively is going to make the human element more important, and it's going to make this sort of referral, relationship, nepotistic dimension to the job market more pronounced because employers need some way to cut through the noise.
It deepens it.
Yeah. And so I will say with employers for a long time, they did struggle to hire first-gen, low-income, non-white college grads. And there have been times in the last 10, 12 years that co-op has existed that employers were thinking about that. I think that's changed, and there's been plenty of coverage of that. The key way we work with employers, and we have a phenomenal partnerships team, and they actively manage more than 100 really warm relationships with employers. The main way, though, that people get hired is through referrals from other alumni. So that's the theory of change at play, right? All of our cohorts are led by 4 near-peer coaches. So we have about 16 to 20 fellows per cohort. They're led by 4 near-peer coaches. We call them cohort captains. Every single one of them is an alum. We've had over 1,000 alumni come back and pay it forward as coaches. And then those coaches, but also the broader network of alumni, are the source of job referrals. So they'll let us know when I mean, that's the thing. There's 23, 24, 25-year-olds have so much power, actually. Yeah. When they come to us, they're feeling isolated and somewhat powerless. Even then, though, I would argue they have quite a bit of power in how they support each other. But then if you manage to get your first good job, you can be 4 weeks into that job and be the reason why someone else's resume gets to the top of the pile. That's right. And so we've recognized that, and we've kind of operationalized it, and we've designed for it. And I think we need to design more interventions based on the reality that social capital is what leads to jobs, not just skills. And I don't mean to say skills don't matter. And we spend 200 hours teaching a lot of skills. But honestly, the main outcome I'm seeking is that you finish the program ensconced in a community of peers and near peers who can provide solidarity and support, but also can literally be the reason you get your first job. One of the things I often tell our fellows on the first day is look around the room. You're not going to love all these people, but 10 of them are going to be really meaningful connections. And one of those 10 is going to be the reason you get your first $50,000 job. But you don't know which one. So some quick math tells me that each of those relationships is worth $5,000 to you, which is an awful way to talk about a friend, of course. But that doesn't make it any less true.
That's right.
And if we don't acknowledge the economic value of these relationships, we won't invest in them accordingly. And so the most important thing we do at Co-op is build that near peer and peer community. Not just because it feels good, but because it is what leads to the outcomes that we all seek. And by the way, that's not extra help that our young folks need. As you pointed out, everyone gets their job that way. But if you're going to a school where you're commuting and working and not living in dorms, like all these things contribute to a sense of isolation or reality of isolation. And that, to me, is the single biggest determinant of underemployment.
I thank you for this time. There's so much more to dig into. And one of the biggest topics to dig into that we haven't covered is how it is that we sustain through, and your language, catalytic funding. Yeah. How do we sustain and dedicate catalytic funding to support the higher education workforce partnerships?
Yeah.
And part of that, we know, is going to be related to the Workforce Pell conversation. So do you want to wind us down on what's next specific to that? And then we can have a separate pod just to focus.
Yeah. Thank you. I appreciate this. So we've reached 10,000 alumni. Lo and behold, our next big goal is 100,000 alumni. And for that
exponential.
Yeah, exactly. A whole magnitude. Very original. But to make that possible, we need to fundamentally change the unit economics of the work we do. So our first decade, our first 10,000 have been fueled by philanthropy. And we know philanthropy needs to be a key part of this.
Shout out to our philanthropic partners,
no question. And it needs to remain an important part of the mix. That said, Workforce Pell is the first public funding we've seen that is truly aligned to our mission. And I think when most people look at Workforce Pell, they're thinking alternatives to college. And that's great, and we're all for that. But we really think that senior colleges and universities need to be looking at Workforce Pell as essentially a way to subsidize a fifth year, a bridge year from the bachelor's into your first good job. As a way essentially of funding the work in those critical first 12 months after graduation. Because that's going to be either when you attach to a professional career or you don't. And so what Co-op is really focusing on in the next couple of years is translating what has been an independent free fellowship into an accredited certificate in partnership with higher ed that will be Workforce Pell eligible. And yeah, I mean, it's good. Co-op is going to have to evolve quite a bit to make that possible. But Workforce Pell is one of these incredibly rare bipartisan policies that, it passed in the big, beautiful bill that did not get Democratic votes. But if it had been a standalone bill, it would have gotten overwhelming support. And so we think it's here to stay. We think the money will grow in time. And so to us, that's something we're really excited about. And just one last thing I'd say, because we're here in New York and we're fanboying CUNY.
Absolutely.
CUNY ASAP, I think, is a really, really powerful model for what co-op is trying to do. On some level, we're trying to be ASAP for careers. So can we get you into your first good job as fast as possible after graduation? And, we know from, the high school to college transition just how precarious and critical transition points are. We have to do the same in the college to career transition, because otherwise young folks are left to sort of navigate that on their own, which inevitably means it will fall to their networks. And it inevitably means that first-gen and low-income college grads will be left out of the careers they deserve.
So interesting. We are absolutely, in New York City and outside of it, we're absolutely aware of what works and why it's valuable. You flagged CUNY ASAP, your model working. We've also flagged, because we know where are the transition points where it gets harder to be able to find a footing. And if you do find your footing during those time periods, economically speaking, not just personally, professionally, but economically speaking, it is hugely difference-making. It's about ensuring that the structures that we have and the institutions that we have reflect those values and those focus points, and that they're resourced the right way.
Yeah.
And so I think I hope everybody who's listening now and spends time with us on this podcast is thinking about all the different ways we talk about what works. And we talk about how institutions and systems need to look very different based on what we know works and how it is that we stand together in support of those efforts. And by the way, to the Workforce Pell conversation, let's be honest, the Workforce Innovation and Opportunity Act, the WIOA, was never reauthorized. So we're still in this universe where workforce investment on a federal level is challenged, even with bipartisan support. But you've got a Workforce Pell piece that we have to dig into, understand, practice, and activate in a way that's going to benefit the organizations we serve, the individuals we serve, and the communities that we are connected to. On that note, Kalani, it's been an absolute pleasure. I feel like we could talk more and more. But listen, make sure you give everybody the public service announcement. Should you be wearing a bike helmet?
Oh, always wear a bike helmet. Saved my life. It can save yours too.
On that note, thank you, everyone. Thank you for joining the NYC Workforce Drop. More to come.